Good Friday evening to you. Hope your weekend is off to a good start. Welcome to this edition of More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. I'm Dave Bacon. Browns training camp starts in just a few days. Thursday it gets going out in Berea. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But baseball fans, we have a pennant race. Don't look now. The Indians are within 4 games of the Minnesota Twins in the American League Central. Let's look back to what the American League Central Division standings looked like just 6 weeks ago, back on June 2nd. Indians were a game under 500 and tied with the White Sox 11 and a half games behind the Twins. Fast forward to where we sit right now as we get set for play tonight. Indians just 4 games behind those Minnesota Twins. They closed that gap that quickly. They are 15 games over 500 and getting set for a 3-game series against the Kansas City Royals over at Progressive Field that will wrap up this 10-game homestand. Let's welcome in Indians beat reporter for MLB.com, Mandy Bell. Mandy, we appreciate the time as always. What do you sense the mood is like with this team now? You saw how much they've closed that gap in just 6 weeks. The series against the Twins didn't start great, but boy, they have got it done against the Tigers and are rolling right now.
Yeah, I mean, the mood couldn't be better. Everyone, it just seems just so much more excited than what they were before June hit. I mean, there's an energy in the clubhouse that was just missing in the beginning of the season. And then after those first 2 games against the Twins, I know a lot of people kept asking, like, what's the mood like? Do they seem down? Are things changing? And it really wasn't like that. It was more like we know we're better than this and we just need to wake up. It was a sense of frustration and anger, but there was nothing like it was, okay, this is done. We're out of it. And then bouncing back on Sunday, and then now this run that they're going on for the rest of the week. I mean, it's been impressive to watch, and I know there's a lot of people that if you gave them a crystal ball on June 1st to look into the future to see where they would be today, even if they said it's 100% accurate, most people wouldn't have believed it. I mean, it's so hard to think that they would shave off 7.5 games off the Twins lead, but it's been an insane run, and I know the Indians aren't hoping it stops anytime soon.
And we mentioned they're getting ready to play the Royals. They've done a very good job, have the Indians, beating the teams they should beat, and there's nothing wrong with that. You need to beat the teams you should beat like they are. Let's take a look at some of the probables. Shane-Bieber's a guy that has given this team a huge lift with all the trouble they've had in the rotation. He has been a consistent, and the young guy has really shined.
He really, really has. I mean, to go from not an all-star to being an all-star to being the all-star MVP to trying to bottle all of those emotions, coming out of the gate this year as the team's number 5 starter. And I know Tito doesn't like to emphasize on the number of starter, whatever you are, whenever you come out the year, because everything starts to fall into place after that. But still, I mean, to be in such a competitive rotation and for so many guys to fall and for him to step up the way that he did, to sort of carry this rotation, the aspect of the game that the Indians were supposed to be able to rely on all year because they knew they would struggle with the bats. I mean, he's been everything and more. And anytime you ask Tito a question about him, it's impossible for him to fight back his smile because he just thinks so highly of Bieber. He says 1,000 times that he's mature beyond his years, and the way that he's pitched and the way that he's stepped up for this team has been absolutely invaluable.
The other guy that's really been impressive in that, the starters, Zach-Plesac has really given the Indians a huge lift, a guy that really wasn't on many people's radars, and he's shown that, the stage is not too big for him.
No, and it's funny because Mike Clevenger was just saying the other night, like, why aren't guys nervous anymore when they come up? I mean, I remember, like, he kept saying that he remembers whenever he was in the dugout and he was running out to throw up before his debut, and these guys come up here and he's like, and they just walk in like they own the place. They're ready to go. They're confident. They're not worried about anything, and then they come up here and they dominate. And he said, I don't know what's going on anymore. But it was funny just because, I mean, Plesac has been, like Bieber, everything and more that the Indians could have asked for. I mean, no one would have expected how many injuries that this team would have to go through. And then to have someone like him who had this sort of the same path that Bieber had, flying through the minor league system to get up to the big league level in just a month span, going from Double-A to a quick stop in AAA up to the big leagues. I mean, it's been extremely impressive to watch him thrive the way he has on such little experience. And I think just because of that, because they have the depth, because of what Plesac has been able to show, that might make them a little bit more comfortable to consider a Trevor Bauer trade. It doesn't mean that it absolutely will happen just because of where they are in the standings now, but someone like Zach Plesac allows them to have a little bit more breathing room because they do have some depth there.
Yeah, and the other thing is, a tip of the cap to the Indians' development people, particularly on the pitching side, because that doesn't always happen. You mentioned Bauer. It's a tough spot for the Indians. I would imagine if they get overwhelmed or they need a major league ready bat and a couple of pitching prospects, they'll really have to think hard about that just because of where he sits contract wise and the like.
Yeah, they're going to have to think a lot, and I know that he was extremely frustrated after his outing last night. I mean, the amount of home runs he's giving up this year is already double of what he did last year, but his numbers have been more than enough to pique the interest of some of these other teams. And I know the Padres are starting to pop up today, and there's been other teams that obviously last night going against Boyd, there was plenty of scouts in attendance last night checking out both of the pitchers who could be moved by the end of the month. But it's going to be an interesting situation for the Indians because they obviously have made a big run. It's still a hard task to claim the division, even though that they have shaved off 7.5 games. But they are sitting pretty for the wild card right now. There's a lot of baseball left to play. There's plenty of things that could happen. It's just a lot of weighing of decisions. The only way that they move him is if they think they're getting the perfect package in return, and they started to show that over the winter. I mean, they Kluber and Bauer were both floated around a lot, but they never bit. They never took any of the bait that was floating out there because they didn't think that they were getting enough in return. They were asking for the king's ransom over the winter. I don't know exactly what they would be asking for, but I know one thing is going to be major league ready bats. I mean, that's the biggest thing. They need some bat to plug into the middle of this lineup. And if they can find a package that's surrounded by somebody who's enough, I know if the Padres are starting to pop up, is Renfroe somebody that they're starting to look at? Reyes. I mean, there's a couple different guys out there that they could be searching for. I know a lot of people started to bring up Clint Frazier whenever the Yankees started saying that they're desperate for starting pitching. I mean, I just don't know if there's going to be a move or a package that's going to be enough to get rid of Trevor Bauer at this deadline whenever they are making this run. But if it is, then it has to be perfect.
Last question I'll ask you, do you see him making, assuming Bauer, they don't get overwhelmed or don't get fair value, what they consider value for Bauer, do you see him adding a potential bat, maybe a Castellanos, somebody like that that's not as costly in terms of prospects, that might be just a rental because they are now in the heart of that Central Division race?
Yeah, I definitely think that is a big possibility. I mean, Chris Antonetti, the Indians president of baseball operations, talked to us about a month ago, and he was saying that because there is no waiver deadline in August, it's all done at the end of this month. There could be a lot more smaller trades right at the buzzer. He said that he could see the influx of trades going up because of that. And I'm starting to think, okay, that could be the way that the Indians end up going if they don't want to part ways with someone like Trevor Bauer or Brad Hand, who's also been thrown out a little bit. But the Indians have proven time and time again how crafty they can get with some of these smaller trades. They've become masters of working with what they've got. They know they have a tight budget. They know that they can't go out and be tremendous buyers because that's just not how their market works here. And then they have limitations. But they have both Chris Antonetti and Mike Chernoff have proven that they can be crafty and they can find those strange deals that can bring somebody in on for a rental on a low budget, and they can make things work and they can piece things together. So I definitely think that if there's not some big trade with Trevor Bauer, Brad Hand, someone like that, they will be able to find a bat in a different way.
Mandy Bell, the Indians beat reporter for MLB.com. As always, we appreciate the time and the insight. You can read Mandy Bell on MLB.com. She is the Indians beat reporter. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. When we return, Jake Burns will join us. We will address the Duke Johnson situation with the Browns. Training camp for the Cleveland Browns starts on Thursday. You're watching More Sports and Les Levine Weekend Winners Edition. Stay with us.
No other company or product can match the features, benefits, and warranty of an authentic Nature Stone floor.
My basement was a disaster. We tried carpet, we tried tile on our uneven basement floor, but nothing worked.
Moisture, dampness, even flooding will not harm Nature Stone. And with Russell's Promise, our true unconditional warranty, you will never have to replace your basement flooring again. Get Nature Stone installed by the end of June and save up to 50%. Schedule your free cost estimate easily online today at naturestone.com. It's not just a floor, wow, it's Nature Stone.
Welcome back to More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. I'm Dave Bacon. Browns training camp gets underway in just a few days, Thursday, out in Berea. And one of the questions is, what will happen with Duke Johnson? Johnson has been very vocal. He wants to be traded. Went out and hired a new agent in Drew Rosenhaus, a guy that's kind of known for getting what his clients want. Let's bring in Jake Burns from the Orange and Brown Report, a contributor here on cleveland.com. And Jake, what do you make of the Duke Johnson situation, and do you think the Browns are going to end up trading him?
I've relatively maintained that I think that they're going to keep him around. I think they're going to keep him unless something drastic comes, and I just don't see the running back market changing before the start of the year, unless some sort of drastic training camp injury happens, or Tampa Bay gets in a little bit of a panic mode and feels like they need to give up something to bolster their backfield. I think if we do see a trade, it most likely comes around week 8. But if the status quo remains the same, I think the Browns do end up keeping him around.
And when you mention week 8, obviously that's around the time Kareem Hunt becomes available and would give the Browns some leeway. In the event that it does happen, who are some guys that you feel that the Browns might look at as free agents? And there are some out there that might replace a Duke Johnson for them.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that used to play for the Eagles. Jay-Ajayi, who a really good running back, played with Miami, was traded to Philly in the middle of their Super Bowl run 2 years ago. I think he's a name that will certainly be attention-worthy. He tore his ACL last year, but he did come back. Sounds like he's ready to go by training camp if somebody gives him an opportunity. I think that he's a sort of complete back that can do a little bit more running the football than the other two options I'll present. The other one's Darren-Sproles, who's a little bit older, still has a desire to play, has been noteworthy lately, trying to say he would come back in the right situation for a Super Bowl contender, preferably somebody he's played with. But that doesn't necessarily mean if the right team doesn't call and the opportunity presents itself, he wouldn't be interested in coming to somewhere like the Browns to fill sort of that Duke Johnson pass catcher role that could be of interest to him. So he's a name sort of that can fill that void and turn sort of the same role that Duke Johnson could. And then Jacquizz-Rodgers, who played most recently with Tampa Bay and Atlanta, I think it's most interesting for him is his connection to Todd Monken and knowing that the scheme that Todd Monken prefers and all of those different things. It could be somebody that Monken feels really comfortable bringing in as a pass-catching back to fill that void for 8 weeks. They're just looking for somebody who can give them depth the first 8 weeks before the trade deadline if they decided to move Duke, somebody that can keep them afloat until until Kareem Hunt becomes eligible to return. And Dontrell Hilliard's an interesting name too, who's already in Cleveland, but I think there are some questions still surrounding that name too. So just interesting to present the options that are there should they choose to pursue the free agent market if they do end up moving Duke.
Let's talk a little bit about Ajayi. That's a guy, you saw the age, just 26. He's coming off the torn ACL. You mentioned he did play. That's a guy that has maybe more running skills than the other two guys, don't you think? Is that accurate, fair to say?
Yeah, certainly. I think he's somebody who's comfortable in gap and zone schemes, and he runs the football well. He doesn't have the top-end speed that he came into the league with out of Boise State, but I do think he's a good football player that can still get the job done on a temporary basis. He's not going to be a 25 carry a game back, but I do think he can still sort of give that blow that would be needed a few series, maybe get 8 to 10 carries, sort of the same workload that Philly was giving him in that, running back by committee situation that they had. So if the Browns do covet somebody who can be a number 2 running back that can actually really carry the football effectively, I think that would make the most sense.
As you look at it, the Browns are pretty well set at running back, and what do you think about that? To me, it looks like they're pretty well set. Do you think they have the pieces there to be very effective in the run game?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Nick Chubb is one of the best. He was Pro Football Focus's highest graded running back in his time spent as a rookie last year. You feel really great about him, his durability. I mean, if you're keeping Duke Johnson around, he's another player that has proven over his 5-year career that he can do a little bit of both, more pass catch than running back, but he can give you 8 to 10, like I said, those second running back carries if you want him to. And then Dontrell Hilliard, although he hasn't recorded an NFL carry, he did in the back half of last year get a lot of action, ended up with 9 catches and just over 100 yards. So that sort of is a status quo going into the year. And then you mix in Kareem Hunt, who's one of the best running backs in the league from a football standpoint coming back week 8. You feel good about it. But the worst case scenario is you trade Duke Johnson, you don't replace him, and then you go into the year with Nick Chubb, and then you only have your backup as Dontrell Hilliard, and then something unforeseen happens to Nick Chubb, and then you're stuck with just Dontrell Hilliard, and then maybe one of the undrafted free agents, Trayon Gray, behind him, and you're sort of in a crisis situation that you don't want to be in a vital first part of the season schedule that the Browns open with. The first 5 games are rather challenging, so it should be interesting to see how that all shakes out, and if they have faith, how much faith they have in Dontrell Hilliard will be evident as well.
Last question I'll ask you before we move on from the Duke Johnson situation here. What would put your mind at ease if you heard from Duke Johnson? What would be a red warning flag that would go up? So in other words, how do you get a read for what's going to happen with him? And what do you think the club wants to hear from Duke Johnson?
Well, I would imagine some sort of joint conference where they, John Dorsey and Duke were able to sit down and say, we put this behind us and we think we have a role here and we're going to make it work. But I've seen nothing but red flags, Dave. I mean, he came to his first appearance in the offseason was, I want to be traded. He was asked a great question about, can this relationship be mended? And he said point blank, no, there is not a way for this relationship to be mended. And then obviously the hiring of Drew Rosenhaus as his new representation, all of it points to a guy who is not just going to sit quietly in the background and just ignore his situation. He wants out of Cleveland. I don't know how long the Browns can avoid it if it keeps getting louder and louder in the background. So as much as I want to say it's just going to disappear, I'm not sure it's going to.
And the other thing is you can't let this become an ongoing distraction during training camp. There's so many big picture things that they need to get done if they're going to be the team they want to be.
Absolutely, and Baker Mayfield alluded to that, trying to keep the guys in the building. The great story written by Mina Kimes recently about Baker is just, you're either with him or against him, and sort of those comments came off as brash, but that's how he's wired. If you don't want to be here, you're welcome to leave. And I think he learned a little bit about the NFL business and how you can't really obviously comment on somebody else's situation necessarily. But it's going to be a lingering problem that we're going to keep talking about until the Browns find some sort of situation to solve it, or Duke Johnson and the Browns front office come out and talk about, hey, we've solved this, we're going to make it work.
Jake Burns, we're going to take a quick timeout. When we return, Jake will help us with the Madden gradings. What did Madden get right? What did Madden get wrong? Who's going to improve? We'll talk grading the Madden ratings when More Sports and Les Levine return.
It takes attention to detail. With your local Bryant dealer, you're getting more than just a technician. You're getting someone who pays attention to your needs and the little things that make a big difference. It takes a dealer you can rely on. And to keep your family cool this summer,
let me show you how this works.
It takes Bryant.
Bryant, whatever it takes.
And to keep your family comfortable, it takes Smiley One Heating and Cooling. Find them at 440-449-HEAT.
Welcome back to More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. I'm Dave Bacon. Well, we talk Madden rankings all the time, and we have a little bit of fun with it. Obviously, it is a way to measure all of the physical skills that the players possess in numbers data. Let's welcome Jake Burns from the Orange and Brown Report back in. Also does a lot of work here on cleveland.com. And Jake, let's start and look at some of the Browns Madden rankings. First, let's start with the guys that you think they got right.
Yeah, I certainly think that the Madden stuff is funny. I mean, it's a game that everybody plays, and at the end of the day, it's just a video game. But this is a video game played by NFL players who care about how their likeness is presented. They talk about it all the time. It's one of the few football games that remain on the market. So while it's kind of trivial to talk about them, it's interesting because it's really how the community feels about those players. So it's interesting to see sort of how Madden ranks them and how the players react to them. So like guys I thought they got right, Odell Beckham as a 96, a guy who's an effective route runner, a guy who's going to be effective at getting open off of short catches, things of that nature. He's a guy that they gave, I think, the 4th best rating to a wide receiver, and it feels right. Myles-Garrett is the 4th ranked defensive end. The defensive end sort of categorizations get a little wonky in video games because there's 3-4 and 4-3 guys, but Myles-Garrett is a 91, guy that can win with speed and power. I think they got him ultimately right, which I think is obviously very important to analyzing sort of the situation as a whole for the Browns, because he's the big part of their defense. Joel-Bitonio is another guy they got right. He's the 4th ranked guard the 6th ranked guard between the two guard positions. He's an perennial All-Pro, one of the Browns' best players, longest tenured guys. Good pass blocking grade, sort of average run blocking grade, which I thought is pretty accurately reflecting of him. And then Baker-Mayfield at an 83 is the 10th ranked quarterback overall, which is pretty accurate for me. People got a little offended about his 83 grade, but Pro Football Focus sort of had him graded as about the 11th best quarterback last year. Back in this rating system with an opportunity to shoot up the rankings feels pretty good. They got his accuracy on the move right. I think they have some of his stuff in terms of how he's sort of at the good accuracy but not elite. The throw power is good. So when you play with him, I think you'll feel like you're playing with actual Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, the other thing is these are all measurables. They do it with route running, speed, all those kind of things. So they're measurable and tangible. Let's shift gears. Guys that you think they got wrong, and one of them is another one of the wide receivers for Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, I think Rashard-Higgins has been inaccurately portrayed for a few years. He's just a 73, doesn't really do anything effective. They gave him a poor speed rating, which is interesting because I think he's a 40-time faster on-field player than Jarvis Landry, who they gave a better speed rating to. But I think his number's destined to shoot up as he's formed a nice relationship and chemistry with Baker Mayfield. They could only get better. They'll give him a better overall rating by the end of the year. Nick-Chubb's only an 85, not a very high running back grade compared to other players at his level. Some of the things that are wonky, like his elusiveness was extremely effective. I think that Nick-Chubb deserved to be closer to probably about a 90 over. I should have said Higgins is a 78 in my opinion. Nick-Chubb should have been about a 90. That would have put him in the top 4 or 5 running backs in the league, which I think he really is. Improved last year with his Pro Football Focus elusiveness grade and his overall score for the year being the best in terms of just sheer ability at the position. So thought he should have been higher, deserved a little bit more respect, obviously. Especially with his speed rating. And then Joe-Schobert's a 79 overall. I don't think that they necessarily portrayed his coverage ability versus his tackling ability, which I think is interesting. He should be about an 81. He should have had a better coverage rating than they gave him in the game, especially man-to-man coverage. So I think he does a nice job down the middle of the field. But his tackling grade was an 80, which is a little too high. He missed NFL most missed tackles last year. So should be interesting there with Joe. I thought he should have gotten a little bit more respect. And then lastly, Olivier-Vernon was an 82, all based on power moves instead of speed. And he really has a nice mixture of speed. So I thought he was like the 7th highest graded pass rusher in Pro Football Focus. Not that Pro Football Focus is the be-all, end-all, but they do a great job of looking at cumulative grades in terms of how a guy performs every single down. Vernon should have been about an 86 in my opinion. That would have been more indicative of his ability to use power moves and a mixture of speed moves because he can win off the edge quickly too. So I'm being nitpicky. I talked to their guy, Andre Weingarten, who I've had him on my podcast specifically, does a great job with franchise development. They have to grade everybody in the entire league. It's overwhelming, but they pour hours into it, and they do a great job. I just thought some of those guys they could have more accurately portrayed.
Well, the other thing is let's look at a couple guys you feel are going to improve, and the first one is a guy that we heard on this show talking about his Madden rankings a couple weeks ago, in Greedy Williams, the cornerback.
Yeah, I think Greedy by season's end will have a much better rating. He's only a 73. I think he'll get up to closer to a 79, 80. He'll have a lot of opportunities, opposite Denzel Ward and in this secondary with options to make plays for this group. I think Greedy will be extremely effective over time. Sione Taki's only a 70. I think he gets closer to a 77. He's a young linebacker taken in the 4th round. He's a fast football player. I think he can be really good in this defense and might end up earning himself a role by the end of the year. Antonio Callaway came into the 75, but he's going to get a lot of deep ball opportunities to put up some big numbers, splash plays, the things that catch a lot of people's eye who don't follow the Browns closely. I think he ends up closer to about an 80 overall, gets a better speed score, improves his hand ratings in that game. He had a lot of drops last year, but I think he can hopefully solidify that last year. And then the last one's Baker-Mayfield, who comes in an 83. And if he puts up the MVP-type numbers he's capable of, looking at the recent trend of second-year quarterbacks, he could end up being all the way up to an 88 or 89 or 90 by the end of the year, a guy who could challenge for those year two awards that guys like Carson Wentz, Patrick Mahomes, Jared Goff have been able to take that massive year two jump. So expect if Mayfield's playing well, the Browns are playing well, they'll increase his rating substantially.
And I absolutely loved Greedy Williams saying my hands rating should have been a whole lot better. The one thing you want from a cornerback is you want the confidence in his ability, and Greedy appears to have that.
Oh, without a doubt. He's going to be a fun player to watch. Came in instantly and earned that, what seems to have earned that starting role in OTAs and minicamp opposite Denzel Ward. So they're treating him like a first-round pick, and he's performing like one.
All right, Jake Burns, let's stick around one more segment. Jake, when we return, let's talk a little bit about a guy that maybe the Browns might be looking at to bring in. Eric Berry, potentially? John Dorsey knows a little bit more about that guy. We'll welcome back Jake Burns, and we'll talk about Eric Berry and the Browns' defense coming up on More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. Stay with us.
There are tastes we remember. Every smell brings the happiness of times gone by. Experience this every time you walk into Gallucci's Italian Foods. Whether you need lunch on the go, a catered party, or that perfect blend of wine, meats, and cheeses, Gallucci's has exactly what you're looking for. Straight from Mama's Kitchen for old world traditions or original experiences. From the tastes you remember to new flavors you'll never forget. Gallucci's is a tasty branch of your family tree.
Welcome back to More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. Browns training camp gets started in just a few days out in Berea. Let's welcome back in Jake Burns from the Orange and Brown Report and contributor on cleveland.com. Jake, let's talk a little bit about Eric Berry, a guy that's still out there, veteran presence by all accounts, just a great guy to have in the locker room. Do you think the Browns are looking at potentially bringing him in, and should they be?
Yeah, I think with Steve Wilkes' 4-2-5 defense, they're going to play with a lot of safety, so it doesn't hurt to bring in somebody on a short deal that could matter to this secondary veteran leadership presence-wise. I know Eric Berry has a history with injuries. I understand that, but Morgan Burnett and Eric Murray were let go by teams that are hurting in the secondary, so having those guys be the biggest players you're relying on just seems like an unnecessary risk if you could bring in Berry on a cheap deal. Obviously, a good football player when he's healthy, overcame Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's just a great story and a passionate person's connected to Dorsey through Kansas City. It just would make some sense. I know Gil Brandt had predicted Berry might end up with the Browns as he was looking at the remaining free agents. I just think it might make some sense for both situations. The Browns want to have as much talent as they can, and they really don't want to have to rely on fourth-round pick Sheldrick Redwine too early in this situation. Jermaine Whitehead's another player that's sort of floating in between that linebacker-safety hybrid rule. But Eric Berry's a good player, and if the Browns have a small window here, 2 years or so, where they can really capitalize on some of these rookie deals, a guy like Eric Berry makes a ton of sense.
You mentioned Steve Wilkes' scheme. Who is important in stopping the run? That's an area the Browns have struggled with. Who are the guys that you're looking to, if you're Steve Wilkes, to step up and have a presence in that run defense?
Well, obviously you're going to need somebody to go along with the two linebackers who are going to be Joe Schobert and Christian Kirksey, which should have an increased role in sort of playing closer to the line of scrimmage and being in a more linebacker-friendly scheme to help the run defense. But you need somebody who can play the slot or bump into the box in that hybrid role, who's not a linebacker but sort of an in-between player. And I think they're looking at Murray, they're looking at Whitehead to do those things, possibly even Morgan Burnett moving down there too. It's just, I just don't know who that guy is, and nobody really solidified themselves in playing that role. And there's certainly nobody with a proven track record of playing that role well. So that's why I've considered Berry as an intriguing option for this team, even with the injury history, an intriguing option that could be somebody who you feel good about putting in that role.
Do you think the tackles that they brought in will help the run defense as well?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think Vernon's going to help as an edge defender. I think that they're going to get a lot of help from Sheldon Richardson. He's going to replace Trevon Coley and bump Trevon Coley into that reserve role that he's probably best fit for. Yeah, I think that the defensive line will be better, and it'll help keep those linebackers free a little bit more, and there won't be such a run-pass conflict. I think that the Browns were putting their linebackers in playing Joe-Schobert at an extreme depth sometimes, too far away from the line of scrimmage. It just makes it challenging for him to be a player that impacts the line of scrimmage. So, yeah, I think that they certainly think that those guys will help. They're going to expect everybody, all 11. Wilkes has sort of referenced the all 11 approach to stopping the run game, and I think that they're going to be – I think they can't get much worse at it than they were last year, so I do expect them to improve in that area. And if they're good enough in pass coverage, ultimately it doesn't mean all too much. The best teams play pass coverage at the in the back half, and that sort of takes care of the run game, because if you're good against the pass, that usually means you have a good defense.
The last thing I'll ask you, and you alluded to it, were the Browns under Greg Williams, the defense, were they asking the linebackers to do, to come in too far? I mean, running backs carrying the ball are pretty darn good athletes. If they're 6-7 yards, that's a tough job.
Yeah, it just makes the opposing lineman able to get to them quicker and with better angles in terms of if guys are consistently, conflicted. Joe-Schobert being asked to run to the deep middle of the field sometimes. They just weren't run gap sound defense last year. And I think that came back to bite them, and especially some games where they were gashed, Kansas City, for example, between teams that could really effectively use all the lanes that the field provides. And I just think that they're going to make life easier on the linebackers this year, asking them to do less in terms of deeper coverage and giving them an opportunity to play run to pass as most guys would hope, and allow them to sort of do what linebackers are supposed to be taught to do and are brought up to do, which is make that impact closer to the line of scrimmage, play secondary pass game support, which is important instead of primary pass game support, because then you can sort of get into your zones a little bit later, not necessarily be worried about retreating and being slow in your read and making it difficult to play the run game once you see those things developing. So they'll play 2 linebackers, which I think is going to be a big difference. You don't want to play 3 linebackers all the time in the modern NFL. You're going to be out-athleted across slot, different exchanges and things like that. So I think they'll be in a better position. They're going to receive better coaching at the linebacker spot from Al Holcomb, and I do have a lot of hope that those two, Kirksey and Schobert, can have bounce-back years.
Jake Burns, as always, we appreciate all of the insights. All the fun starts Thursday out in Berea with Browns training camp. We will be sure to be checking in with Jake Burns. Appreciate it, Jake.
Thanks, guys. Always appreciate you having me.
All right. Good talking to you. Jake Burns from the Orange and Brown Report and here at cleveland.com. We're all out of time on this edition of More Sports and Les Levine, the Weekend Winners Edition. Have a great weekend. Remember, Les will be back here Monday night, 6 to 7, and he will have cleveland.com columnist Doug Lesmerises as his guest. Have a great weekend, everyone.